Guys, this is bonus content for you, the internet viewer. This isn't going out over the airways, but this is my buddy, Jared Anderson. We've actually met when I was campaigning for New York State Senate. Him and his buddy, David Weiss, reached out to me, and we've done a couple podcasts together, and we had some great conversations. So we were just having one right before. I wish that I had got it on record. But anyways, Tueli, say it for me, brother.
Tooele. It's
Tooele.
It used to be spelled like it sound, but it got changed, I think, in the 50s. It's Tooele, but it used to be like Toole or something, but they changed it back then. But it's a Native American word, from what I understand. We have go shoot out here is the dominant in the county, and I believe it's a word from their language.
All right, cool. So basically, you're going to be joining me for my radio show. We're going to talk about you had a great pendulum swing thing. We're going to talk about that thing I did on my page about the biggest problems in New York State. And so we need to kind of break things up so I can edit this out and not burden my producer with it. So we'll go for about 10 seconds. I'll hit pause, and then we'll come back live and do the show.
Sounds good.
All right, guys, it's Tim O'Connor, your Thursday host for A Free Solution. I have a special guest today, but first, remember, this goes out on WYSL and WACK. I share this platform with the estimable Larry Sharp, the amazing Kevin Wilson, Andrew Hollister's showed up. Rich Pertel has helped me with a few shows. Jim Ostrowski, one of the only lawyers that actually fights for libertarian values, libertarian principles, pro Second Amendment. He's done a show with me, and I want to do another show with him because, man, he was great. Because some of you might have noticed, I have the show's called today A Freedom Variant, and I think that I'm going to use that as my new call letters. But I want you guys to meet my friend Jared Anderson. He's from Tooele, Utah, right?
Yep, that's right. You hit it.
All right, cool. So one of the things, you and I have done a couple podcasts together, and first of all, you're a libertarian like myself. You maybe even be the government does really bad things. I think we could all benefit from slightly less government. We had this conversation the other night, Friday night, about how the pendulum is swung. You want to jump right into that?
Yeah, I'll try to break it down just like I did. You were on my show last Friday. I have a show out here in Utah. It's more of a local number of county, but from all the polling, independents seem to stay in the middle and parties kind of move around the sides of them. And so sorry, my guard dog was.
It happens, man.
Garden. And anyways, so the parties move around beside them, on the outsides of them. And I remember back in 85, I was just a young man then, but I remember watching the hearings about whether music needed to have warnings and everything else. And that was a pendulum swing to the right. And I mean, the big push on that was Tipper Gore, a Democrat wife, the wife of the vice president.
Let me ask you about this. When I go back through some of Bill Clinton's writings and some of Bill Clinton's presentations, I think in this day and age, I think the Democrat Party would try to disavow him as being too radically conservative. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And there's always been staples that the Clintons stood for that would fall under the Democrat Party, like a universal type healthcare, a government provided healthcare. And so there's always staples that both sides kind of stand on, but there's different dances around the edges. And so you look at it, you've got, back then you had the right had all the power, and it's not necessarily a party. It's more of that right ideal. Hang on a second. This dog is.
All right. So basically, we're kind of in agreement that Bill Clinton back in the 80s would come off as a conservative in this day and age. He was definitely fiscally conservative. He even balanced the budget, right? Like for the
Well,
first time ever or in decades.
did he balance it, or did the invention of the internet balance it for him?
Always a little hocus pocus anyways when the
Yeah,
government's putting numbers out. Let's be honest about that, right?
that's true. But a new means of commerce was invented. So that allowed a total influx to hit the tax coffers. So they were allowed to do a little more stuff. But anyway, so you got the pendulum swing. That's the pendulum all the way out to the right. And the independents started voting Democrat then, or started voting left. And when they did that, that gives the party an idea that they have a mandate, that all these, let's push the next year, we'll push new ideas and we'll push the field further. Well, the polls have come out over the last 2 years. The Republican Party are gaining more independents than the Democrat Party. And so you've got your stronghold, you've got your Democrat and Republican, the single issue voters, they don't count. It's only the independents that truly count. And so we're starting to see that change over the last about 4 years. It kind of leveled out. Now the Republicans are getting more votes. So I think we're poised to see the pendulum start moving back. So right now we've got the left are kind of totalitarian.
I mean, the left always seems totalitarian to me. And I think I'm a little bit older than you, but they always, even the concept of democracy devolves into totalitarianism, where
Yes.
one group, because there's a larger number of them, votes to take all of your rights away and throw them out the window, regardless of what you think your rights are.
100% true.
They change that, right?
Yeah, you're 100% right on that. But the dominant party are totalitarians. I don't know if you remember back in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, the satanic panic that came out.
Oh yeah, I remember all that. Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
I mean, right now, it's comical, but it really happened. And that was the right being totalitarian. See, our living memory, the left has gained power. So they've been the totalitarians. But you've got to remember, in the 60s, it was the left that fought for your First Amendment. It was at Berkeley that the students rose up. Nowadays, Berkeley, could you imagine students rising up for you being able to think, just to have thoughts in your head, let alone say them out loud?
Yeah, that's an amazing point, right? So for me, and one of the reasons I got to the Libertarian Party after kind of being a Clinton fan, definitely having been a Reagan fan, then liking Clinton. I know that doesn't make sense, but that was as things were sliding. They both spoke of things that I felt were important. One spoke very well on the concept of freedom, and then one spoke very well on the concept of fiscal responsibility and social kind of, even though they were the ones that put the warning labels on the albums. Remember that?
Yep, that was under, I believe it kicked off in 85. So it kicked off under Reagan, carried on through Bush 1, and then jumped right into, and it was completed during Clinton. And that was a long argument. So I think it's whoever's in power struggles to maintain their power. That's what totalitarian is.
So I was, to get to the Libertarian Party, I realized that there are people that simply love power for power's sake, and that being that anti-power, when we've seen throughout history, parties morph, they disappear. And one of the reasons seems to be why is because the reaction to totalitarians, when they're invaded in both parties, and guys, I'm very sympathetic with Republican concepts and ideals, the smaller government ideals, the freedom ideals. When they speak eloquently and they take action in that direction, I find that to be valuable. But I'm finding fewer and fewer Republicans that do that. They basically virtue signal. They basically say, I want slightly less government than that guy. I don't want less government. I just want slightly less government than the evil guy that I'm running against. And so here we are. I'm hoping that over the course of the next few years, we see some big changes.
Well, that's the thing is Republican politicians don't value Republican ideals.
They, I, guys,
And
right. I agree with that.
just like Democrat politicians don't value Democrat ideals. And their voters value the strength that your team winning gives you.
Yeah.
It I think when you become libertarian is when you take a look at it and you say, and this is on the spectrum. You've got left libertarians and right libertarians. You've got libertarians coming from both parties, but it's when you look at it and you say, maybe the federal government shouldn't be the voice of control.
I-
Maybe we can, like the 10th Amendment. I'm a big advocate of that. And I want, like the big fight right now, the Roe versus Wade fight. That's the big one in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, and if you listen to their arguments and you're familiar with it, it'll kind of make you giggle, because the Supreme Court made an unconstitutional ruling. They wrote a law from that bench, which specifically isn't supposed to happen.
Yeah. Hey, we're coming up on a break.
Yeah.
Let's try to hold this thought in our heads about the Roe versus Wade. I do want to explain the freedom variant some more. And so
yeah.
check out our sponsors, and thank you all for being here. We'll be back in just a minute. So guys, this is the pause to make it easier to edit for my producer. So hold up. All right, welcome back to A Free Solution, guys. This radio show goes out on WACK, WYSL. It goes out on the A Free Solution Facebook page. It goes out on Twitter. Guys, we're all over the place. We've got a couple of YouTube channels, and it even gets broadcast to Oneonta area business and politics. So as we were going, before we went to the break, we were talking about the unconstitutional ruling and legislating from the bench that happened in the original Roe v. Wade ruling. Is that where you were going?
Yeah. It was an argument that kind of fell on, it kind of fell on your privacy rights and on your speech rights. So it kind of drifted between, my understandings, it drifted between the First and the Fifth Amendments. And the bench just made a law from the Supreme Court, which they were there to rule, is it legal for the state or for doctors to do the reporting in between themselves? And instead they said, okay, we're going to mandate abortion nationally on the general government level, which I think, well, one, I haven't read the full Constitution in a minute, but I don't remember seeing the word abortion in there at all.
Now, my understanding was it kind of came down to, and I read the Roe versus Wade decision, and what it came down to was this right to privacy, where I felt as though when I read it and some of the stuff I read about it, I felt as though the court was being asked to decide, can we decide when life begins? And then at that point say no abortion.
And that's when it devolved into that an argument saying, do doctors have a duty to report abortions to the state? And I agree they don't, because again, you've got the amendments that say you have the right to being secure in your papers and property. And so they lost track on that one. And this argument now, and then I'm listening to it, and you've got the left-leaning judges arguing, well, we just can't give in to political whims and whatever else. And I'm like, it was a ruling that shouldn't have happened the way it did. And I think that it should be left up to the states. It should be a state's issue, because states can move and have that in their constitution. If we want it in the general constitution or the federal one, the US one, then we need to have an amendment process made, and we shouldn't run around that amendment process where 25 of the states are forced to withhold the values of 25 other states.
I think you're making a pretty interesting point. And I think what happens is that the abortion rights argument gets like, it's very emotionally charged. And so I think that we miss principles when we devolve. Again, we've devolved, our society has devolved into emotionality anyway. I do want to shift off of this topic. I think you did a great job of covering it. I think you did a great job with talking about that pendulum swinging from, basically there's this center middle, and the argument is for the independents, or somewhere in the center middle, which side can persuade them. And I have like a life experience story about that. My mom was, I would basically call her a very liberal Democrat back in the 80s. And she has swung, not because she changed, but because the presentation of politics has changed. So she swung all the way over to being a Trump supporter this last election cycle. And she's very disappointed with Biden. And believe me, I get it, man. I get it.
How?
I get it.
The guy is, the economy's booming. It's not like we're on the doorstep of war with Russia right now. China is really, I mean, they're holding their P's and Q's. And
did you catch how they're actually like consulting with the media how to present their side of the story better to make it more palatable? Like, that's a real thing in 2021. I'm just blown away by it, man.
The crazy thing is that they're public with it. I'll bet they've been doing it for a while, but it's almost like they said the Cuomos did it.
They did it.
What do we do? You know,
they got away with it for years. Like, I can't wait till the Cuomo Brothers podcast that's going to be coming out. You know it, right? Maybe they'll come on this show with us.
Yeah. Oh boy, that'll be. You know, what'd be funny is you find out that once they're separated from the power politics, they're both rather freedom loving. That'd be interesting to find out.
Well, I think one of the things that we can say about Cuomo is, as far as left-leaning politics versus right-leaning politics, he in fact was something of a moderate, at least until this whole COVID thing came down. He was kind of bullied into getting rid of the Independent Democratic Council because he didn't want to be, I believe, was primaried on the Working Family Party line. And so he got rid of the Independent Democratic Council, where they would sometimes collude or work with upstate New York to make sure that upstate New York had representation on some level. And he crushed them, man. He primaried all those Democrats, destroyed that. He made good on his promise, like that he would take care of that. And he did. I did a show on it a couple of weeks ago. But
I'm not familiar with it. I'm gonna have to go dig up your show and watch that.
Yeah, because it was pretty interesting. And I had a lot of stuff right in front of me. So basically in 2018, he was going to be primaried by Zephyr Teachout on the Working Families Party line. And he really wanted that line because it does contribute like 300,000 votes, no matter what, every election cycle. And as a concession to them, they're very progressive. They want very left-leaning, very almost socialistic kind of things. Not almost, let's be honest, right? They're driving towards socialism, and that's part of the electoral process. I get it. But he basically destroyed upstate New York's representation of having independent Democrats that didn't just simply toe the party line. They actually said these issues are different in upstate and even out on Long Island than they are in New York City. And we need answers for that. So they used to stand against him, and he got rid of the 6 or 7 people that would stand with upstate New York Republicans. And it was, political hatchet job. It was amazing, right? It was amazingly successful. I think a lot of Republicans are hoping it will be reborn on some level, but I don't hold up a lot of hope on that.
Well, and that's another funny thing is a Republican in New York, even in upstate New York, would not match a Republican here in Utah.
I think that's a great point. Let's travel down that road. That one wasn't part of our plan, but let's do that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, kick it off. I just the stance on two-way.
Oh my God. We in our county are fighting for a Second Amendment sanctuary county, right? And our Republicans have presented we have several thousand signatures on a petition, and by we, a lot of people did a lot of hard work to get this there. But they've basically sat on these petitions now for, I've got to say, almost a year, and they're saying, well, we're going to try to clean up the amendment, we're going to try to represent it, and then we don't think it's a good idea, and they do all of those things, right? They want to do away the pro 2A Otsego County Sanctuary movement doesn't like the red flag laws. They don't like some of the limitations on handguns. They don't like some of these things. They're all still not quite as gun friendly as you and I might be, but they're good, solid Second Amendment supporters. And so that's this constant battle. These Republicans probably out there in Utah would look like what? Like radical Democrats, kind of like we were talking about Bill Clinton.
They would probably be looked at kind of like your base Democrat out of Salt Lake City. I mean, the Republicans did the same thing here. We had what was it, Prop 2 or whatever? It was legalization of marijuana. And the state voted for it across the board, the whole state.
Nice.
I think it won something like 62% of the vote. And so the Republicans pulled it in and chewed on it for a minute, and then put out I think it took like 3 years to cough out we've got a limited medical marijuana. We voted for legalization, for just complete, and well, maybe not decriminalization on the state level. And the Republicans came out and said, no, yeah, you guys may have voted, but let me show you how government works. Your vote really doesn't matter, and we'll give you this.
Yeah, we have a better idea, right?
Yeah,
we're wrestling with that whole weed legalization thing out here. Towns can opt in for legal recreational marijuana sales, or they can opt out. We're coming up on the deadline where they have to directly opt out, or it becomes legal to sell marijuana. Like they put this, I found it to be a proactive way of saying, look, you really got to be against this, or it's coming, or it can come to your town. Of course,
so you have to vote no, or it happens.
Yes,
that's the way it should be written. You come up with a plan that works better, or we're going to allow liberty to stand. Let's remember, this nation's design was on liberty. Now it's fallen short of that mark every year since its design, but that's the design. I think our goal should be to meet it.
Yeah, I think in New York, it's actually not. I wish that it was about liberty. It is about decriminalization, which I like. Okay. But what it's actually about is tax revenues for the state. They know that there's this massive black market weed thing going on, right? They know it. Now they can make it legal and they can generate tax revenue. And that's the promise, right? We're going to take this money and create more programs that will chase more people out of New York State. I mean, every program we've created so far has done nothing to stem the tide of population loss in New York State. So I don't know what they're going to come up with.
How many congressional seats did you guys lose last year?
Two.
That's pretty scary when you
I think I think we're going to lose more. That was pre-COVID. Okay. That was pre-COVID, and the authoritarian response to COVID in New York State has been brutal. I have promised to talk about the freedom variant. We're coming up on another break. I am going to do that. It's Tim O'Connor with his buddy Jared Anderson, and we are talking freedom, liberty, pendulum swings, and the freedom variant. We'll be right back. All right, guys, it's Tim O'Connor. We're back. It's a free solution. It is, guys. I didn't even tell you the date today. It's December 9th, 2021. We're halfway through the show with my buddy from Utah, Jared Anderson. And I've been promising to talk about what I'm calling the freedom variant. First of all, one of my goals in life is to help spread what I'm calling the concept of freedom. And we do have to accept, Jared, I think, that some people are not comfortable with freedom. They're afraid of freedom. They want their needs to be taken care of. They want the government to provide them with everything. But I've got an interesting story that's going on in New York State right now, out in Erie County, where some people with this show, this this Poland cards or Poland Krantz. Let me see if I want to get his name right. I'm trying not. Poland cars. Okay. The Omicron variant came about, and he's all like, everybody's got to wear masks all over the place, inside, outside. That's it. I'm mandating it. I'm turning up the heat. Nobody out in public without masks. Anywhere in public, you got to have a mask on, which, guys, we all know that even Fauci admits that that's not a good idea. But he hasn't consulted with CNN. So then there's guys at the opposite end of the state in Albany County and in Schenectady County. We've got Dan McCoy, the Albany County executive. And well, let me see if I can find this guy's name. Fluman, Rory Fluman. He's the manager of Schenectady County. And they're like, look, we don't want any more mandates. Nobody wants any more mandates. We think it's a good idea if you guys wear a mask, because COVID's real. People are getting sick from it. If you feel like you're at risk, we want you guys to put your masks on. I heard that, and I just came up with, we've got to start talking about freedom based on this. What do you think about this opposite end of the spectrum kind of behavior from our elected tyrants?
Well, on the freedom word, I choose to use liberty, and liberty is freedom through sacrifice, freedom through well-made decisions. Because you get the left, and they look at freedom as the ability to do whatever you want, and the right, they look at freedom as being kind of a moral standing sets you free. And so I think in a way they're both right and they're both wrong. I choose liberty. I want a government to say, look, we expect you to maintain your life at whatever level you can. And we're going to stay out of it. And we're only going to get involved in certain areas. And I think that is probably the ideal we want. As far as the different governments, I wonder if that is just, I wonder if that's just their feeding into their populace. They may even ride from the same party and feeding into their populace. We've had Democrats out here in the rural areas of Utah who stood up against any kind of mandate in Utah. And we had Republicans that are from Salt Lake City, Provo, and Ogden. That's our major developed areas, who toyed with the idea of mandates. So I don't know if it's a party line, but I think it seems to follow under population. I think all this follows under population. We're reaching a point where it's rural versus urban. I heard one guy brought up the Spanish Civil War that happened right before World War II. That was a rural versus urban fight. And I feel like that's where it's at. And of course, if you're urban, you're at more hazard of coming in contact with someone who's sick, where if you're rural, the further out you go, the less hazard you have. So I'm not familiar with New York's geography. Could that be a part of it?
I think that it obviously is, and that's going to lead us into what I hope to cover on our next segment. I did that thing on my page that actually you participated in, and the biggest problems with New York State. There is clearly a rural versus densely populated urban area divide. We do have we have one Democrat that I know of in a city that is anti-mandate, and he and I did a show together. He's been on this show with Kevin a couple of times. His name's Jose Pio. And he's a really nice guy. He's a former military guy. He's just like, mandates are bad. Knock it off. Take the vaccine if you want to. It looks like it helps a lot of people, but let's not force anybody to take a vaccine that they don't want to take. And so, yeah, no, we definitely see a similar dichotomy here, that densely populated urban areas. And again, that goes back to my earlier comments about the tyranny of democracy, right? Where a large group of people get to say, here's your rights. They're not as good as ours, or you have to do what we tell you because we're telling you to do that because there's more of us. And I think that dynamic is causing a real problem in our country. Like I do fear for the future sometimes. I used to be such an optimist too, and I don't know what's going on with that.
Well, you lived.
Yeah.
Well, so we've got the 10th Amendment and the Bill of Rights. That's anything not written in this little document goes to the states and they decide. And what if states had a 10th Amendment for counties? And what if counties had a 10th Amendment for cities? And they allocated that way we could have the 10th Amendment the way I envision it. And let's remember, I've got to make this clear to all your listeners. I am a moron. I am.
You are not a moron, but I get it, man. Go.
I am almost smart enough to tie my shoes. I wear Velcro, by the way. But, so you get a melting pot of ideas. So what if the different counties could practice, and even the different cities, and then you have a chance for one city to look at another and say, maybe that city went too libertarian, or what would have been called liberal, 100 years ago.
Right.
Maybe they went too far that way and it had a bad effect. And we didn't, and that city could learn from us. Or maybe, maybe the economic drawbacks of having a mandate. And also, let's look at these masks. I mean, what was it? 8 months before we started wearing all these masks, they were outlawing straws because it was getting stuck in turtle bungs or something. I don't know. And now I promise you, this will be a study in the most time that we've had that debris pollution since we've recorded it.
Yeah.
This will be considered a disaster, and we'll be inventing robotic boats to go and sweep it out of the ocean. And hey, it's an economic boon for someone down the road. I mean, until that time, we're going to have mini collapses of ecosystems.
Yeah.
So,
in New York State, we actually have what's called the Home Rule Doctrine. It's Article 9 of the New York State Constitution, which is like the 10th Amendment for the states' rights issue. Like, basically, the governing unit is counties first, then it works its way up the food chain. And so every local county is supposed to be able to make all of its own decisions. Now,
did anyone tell Cuomo?
Well, he basically very craftily came up with several workarounds, right? You get a county addicted to money and they're going to do what you tell them to do. So that was one of his workarounds. He made a couple of laws that prevented sheriffs from going completely rogue, so that if a sheriff doesn't follow certain rules that New York State makes, he could come in and replace your county sheriff. Now, that would be no one's ever tested it. And certain sheriffs in New York State do take stands against unconstitutional mandates and unconstitutional rules. So
wasn't it in the city though? It was the sheriff's department in New York City that they were using as the COVID enforcer, because the NYPD was like, we're not doing this. So it was the sheriffs they used to go lock down businesses, drag hairdressers off to whatever COVID jail or whatever. I mean,
I don't know how the city has a different structure, right? Because in our county, the sheriff would be able to make those decisions. There's no one higher than the sheriff in elected office.
And there shouldn't be anyone higher than the sheriff anywhere.
Right.
He is your elected armed individual.
I like that. Yeah. But of course, everything gets bastardized as we move forward through politics, right? Like we're centralizing authority. And that is, in fact, where these problems come from. And so Cuomo was very crafty about a lot of that stuff. We're coming up on another break. Oh my gosh, we're running out of time. We will be right back. We're going to talk about the biggest problems in New York State after this break. All right, guys. Once again, it's Tim O'Connor, your Thursday host for A Free Solution. But look, tomorrow it's Kevin Wilson and we're going to be doing the fake news stuff, and I'm going to be busting his chops, and we're going to actually, I'm pretty sure he's descended from Woodrow Wilson, so we may even work in a little bit of bashing of Woodrow Wilson. And guys, so please join Kevin and I on Friday. We have a good time, and the comments, the likes, the shares, the conversations, the phone calls. That's basically why we do it, and we enjoy it. But it's still with me today, Jared Anderson. And Jared and I, we're going to talk about the biggest problems in New York State. Every once in a while, I pose a question on my Facebook page that I want to bring out into the public. And so I get this radio show that, again, I share with Larry Sharp, Kevin Wilson, and Andrew Hollister to talk about things that are important to you. So I put this thing like, what's the biggest problems in New York State? And as I'm working down through it, there's some similar things. And then a couple really smart guys like Rich Patel made a comment, and Dr. Mark Legowski made a comment that cover all of the symptoms of the problem versus a lot of people want to talk about just the symptoms. So let me put one out there that I think is more of a symptom, right? A lot of people really want to go with the complete one-party control of New York State as one of the biggest problems, which I understand it is, but and basically it is, as I mentioned before, the Independent Democratic Committee had been gutted by Cuomo's political machinations. So it is complete and total one-party rule in New York State right now, even though you can find the occasional anti-mandate Democrat. What do you think? Can it just be Democrats that are doing it?
Well, like we said earlier, I think one, I don't like the party politics, because parties kind of dilute areas where you can look. We had a Democrat running for state Senate out here, and I really liked him. He was a rural Democrat, spent his life working in the State Department and a whole bunch of other things. He was not successful in his run, and what killed him is he had that Democrat in front of his name.
Right.
But the only thing I think he very different on was he wanted to see a universal health care. But that's because he had people that he cared about, that he saw that would benefit them. He saw that, his constituents would see benefit from it. And I'm not arguing they wouldn't. And I would like to see that if we did something like that, it would be run on at the largest county level, and the county received the funds for it and figured out how to dole that out to best serve their people. And some people, you may have to figure out how to move closer to a county that meets your needs. And that's part of that melting pot, where it also gives the populace a choice to relocate to an area that they feel will prosper their life the best.
Thank you. Wouldn't that be better? But that's what I think you're on the right track there, where we can just change our locale just a little bit and deal with like-minded people. But we're getting regimented laws, top-down governing. So another one that I thought was pretty hot, like the lack of accountability to the people by the governments, the politicians, and those that enforce their will. None of the above, the politicians, and this guy is a great writer, my friend Derek, none of the above mention fear the people any longer. They do as they wish with no fear of repercussions. It's completely disrespectful and disheartening to watch them do as they please with no consideration for anyone other than themselves and the lobbyists that line their pocketbooks. And that's
whose fault is that?
Right. I will say this, though, that
if you're recognizing this, if you're sitting there going, this guy is working against me, against my well-being, and he still gets in, that's our fault. We get the politicians we deserve. We get the politicians we allow.
I'm going to say that if we get down through this list, we're going to get to a couple of issues in New York State. And I don't know if they're particular to New York State. We could have a whole conversation about that. But there are power structures in New York State that make this possible, this lack of accountability. And actually, let's just jump right to one of the reasons why these guys are completely unaccountable, or at least one of the reasons. They don't have to collaborate ever, right? So when they redistrict New York State, they gerrymander it. Like when I ran for Senate District 51, this thing was like 150 miles long, 100 miles wide. It's the biggest Senate district in New York State. It's absolutely huge. And then there's Senate districts that encompass like 4 blocks in a city. Okay. Now, I might be exaggerating, but what happens is they draw out these districts so that they can pretend that a Republican is getting representation. And then they draw out these districts where Democrats can maintain control, but they don't ever have to collaborate with Republicans and Democrats. So that does also kind of go back to the one party rule, but they never have to collaborate to come up with better ideas for their constituents. They just do. They just answer the demands of the Democratic Party, and the Republicans just battle them. Am I bringing that issue home, like the gerrymandering issue?
Oh, a gerrymandering happens everywhere. That's just how that's so that they can try to get apportion numbers. And they do. I mean, some places are worse than others. They do draw some pretty goofy lines. It would be almost nice is if, unless you're completely surrounded urban or rural, you have to try to include both areas. But again, it goes back to the people aren't making their they're not seeking the knowledge before they vote. Is this guy working for the betterment? Even something simple. And that's where that you and me, we have a hand where we can control this. I need to get smarter so that I can dig through economic evaluations and say, hey, we've gone down since this cat got in there. So why have we gone down? Maybe find some economic scientists or majors or something and bring on the knowledge, have a 10-minute segment on my own show where they can come on and say, look, this is the outcome of that. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is there future outcomes? It's going to be more disastrous. And that's what I'm doing. I work on a county level,
Right?
Because that's where I vote. I might vote for state next year. You'll be hard stretched to see me vote for anything general, whether I send Mike Lee back to Washington, D.C. But I vote on a county and a city level because these are people. I have them on my show. I talk to them. I can kind of find out where they're at. And
all politics is local,
Yeah.
right? All politics can be local.
it should be if you hold them to it. Well, okay, let's talk about some New York City special. You've got AOC.
Yeah. Oh boy. I got a buddy running against her. It's going to be fun. He's
Good.
brilliant. He's hilarious.
AOC is not a New York politician. She's not. She's a national politician.
Correct.
Nothing that she does tries to earn any benefit for the district she covers, for the state she's from, for the city, for the apartment complex she lives in. Everything she does is to bring a national voice to the Justice Democrat Party. Everything she does. And the people who vote for her should recognize that and say, hey, now granted, no national politician is going to clean up your streets because that's not their job.
Right.
But maybe they should at least once in a while. I'll bet if you ran up to her and asked her, hey, where's your district at? She wouldn't know.
I get it. And I'm all for making fun of her, but I bet she knows where her district is. One of the things that they do on the federal level is bring money back to their district. But that's what their job is. But you're right. She doesn't really represent them. She presents them with money for projects. Okay. Federal money for projects, for the homeless, for this thing, for that thing.
What projects has she brought back? Well, there was a big employer that was coming in there that she shut down.
Well, she chased out Amazon, but
that's because
that's a whole show in and of itself, brother.
Yeah, but she did that for the Justice Democrats, not for her district, because her district could use that.
Well, but did her district want it? Because weren't the people in her district right there by her side saying, and it was a demand for bribes, right? Had the whole thing been framed differently, I wonder if it would have been successful. And I felt like she did something there that was not her worst thing ever. I felt like she might have represented the people in that community that said, we don't want Amazon coming here and taking our community over.
Sure, maybe. I don't know how much of the community wanted a job. I know you might get what, 1/100th of her district show up and stand by her side, and then the other people have jobs on a Monday morning.
And they would like a
And
big pay raise and a
and they
cooler
would like a
job.
pay raise. They would like to see
Yeah.
more competition, because you bring in another business, that's more competition for all the other businesses in the area.
Yes, I agree with that. They were talking about a complete revitalization of the area. And who knows, when you let politicians mix and match with big business to revitalize an area, that means like that redlining, that means gentrification, that means chasing people out that don't meet the goals and desires of it. So I'm still, I don't know. I got to talk to my liberal roots here. I still liked some of what you did when you battled Amazon there.
Maybe it does. Maybe it does mean gentrification, and gentrification is not always bad. It's not bad.
Right. No,
I'm going to say something. This may not be included on your radio show, so leave a mark for your guy. If you've got a community that has, say, a murder rate of, let's call it 0.5%, and all the homosexuals move in and open up coffee shops, and
I've got to cut you off
stuff
right now, because here's the deal. And that it's not personal. It is, we're coming up on the end of the show. So, and you were going to go sideways on me. I know you were. Anyways, guys, it's A Free Solution. It's Tim O'Connor and his buddy, Jared Anderson. Jared, I hope you do this again in the future. This was a blast. And guys, I feel sorry. I feel bad. I didn't get all the way down to the list of major problems in New York State. One of them is one of my two favorites, the gerrymandering and the centralization of power. And those are the big ones. Those cause a lot of the other ones. Thank you all for being here.
Can I throw out one comment?
Please do.
Make the power less, then the centralization doesn't matter.
There you go. That I absolutely agree. 100%. Guys, it's A Free Solution. We'll be back tomorrow.
Thanks for having me, man.